So we saw a random assortment of various Star Wars clips in about 88 seconds. That's pretty neat, right? And since J.J. Abrams has publicly sworn off lens flares, I'm looking forward to his lack of lens flares and just about any other form of memorable piece of storytelling that he may or may not have had at all in his career.
Stop! He's our only chance to save Kirk!
But of course, integrity of the art, or the artist, is what very few are complaining about. Instead, in true to form nerd fashion, most Star Wars fans are upset that the lightsaber looks kind of weird, and that Disney more or less tossed out all of the expanded universe from the book continuity from the franchise. First of all, a little bit of housekeeping. The word continuity really shouldn't be used in this fashion. In art and in entertainment, the word continuity simply refers to how consistent something is. Whether that thing is the look and location of a house, the worldviews or ideologies of the characters and the progression thereof, and in film specifically, making sure that certain props don't move in between takes. What we're really talking about here is narrative canon, which is a term we get from when writers and collectors of sacred texts, such as the Holy Bible, would decide whether or not a collection of works called the Apocrypha really belonged being inserted between the Old and the New Testaments. In this case, Disney decided that the expanded universe didn't belong between any of the Star Wars movies, which therefore meant that they didn't consider them canon to their movies. What actually seems to be happening is the simple fact that established canon was never really a finished product within narrative works. In fact, I would be hard-pressed to find any sort of fictional material that was considered completed and finished by its creators. See, we tend to want to view canon as though it were a snow globe, contained in a state of static existence and unaffected by the outside world. In reality, canon is developed by an artist or storyteller and is interpreted by an audience. This means that canon is actually always in a state of flux, with its development changing along with its storyteller, and the interpretation thereof changing along with its audience. Most notably are the moments when storytellers use various methods of adding and removing certain things from the story at any one point during the canon's development. Now, the idea that canon never was a finished product seems to come from the modern internet user's tendency to take whatever entertaining pseudo-analytical blurb that they've read on TV tropes or things like that as actual analytical material and media. Media, mind you, being one of the most lasting and prominent ways to determine how any particular generation felt about any particular trending topics, social and civil issues, and even politics and wars. From these pseudo-analytical sources, people have decided that words like continuity apply, when they really mean canon, and that the idea of a finished and completed canon was ever a thing to begin with. If you were to read what actual artists in any industry have to say, modern or historical, you would find that they felt that no piece of art was ever really finished, which would include concepts and devices within art such as narrative canon. Renowned historical artist and inventor Leonardo da Vinci once said, "Art is never finished, only abandoned." Household name Peter Jackson echoed this sentiment when he said, "You are never finished with a film, you only run out of time." Brad Bird has the same approach when it comes to telling his stories.
It's absolutely done. I have no more things that I want to do or ideas. It's like you're going, you're tinkering, and then the door goes.
This is pretty much the outlook by any artist or storyteller about their own works. Audio commentaries and behind-the-scenes features on many DVDs and Blu-rays now give viewers insight into the fact that everyone is pretty much wanted to do or say certain things in their movie, but couldn't because of some restriction, regardless of time or budget. In this sense, canon is never really a finished product either. It is only an abandoned product. What we, the viewer, see is a state of abandonment of each work we decide to experience. Now, this isn't to say that we need to include deleted scenes or older script rewrites when we consider a narrative canon in film, but only that the movie we're watching is an abandoned canon and not a completed canon. In this way, if canon is never a finished product to begin with, then the idea of retcons really don't exist either. The viewer is simply watching a canon unfold differently from the way it's unfolded before, even if this so-called retcon is supposed to have taken place in a much bigger DC Comics style universe. It can get to the point where so many changes and alterations are made to an ever-developing canon that the story fails to make sense or doesn't keep the attention of the audience. And this is the fault of the writers for that disconnect between artist and audience. What newer technology has allowed for is the fact that a filmmaker doesn't have to abandon his canon forever if he doesn't want to, and that he can go back and add things or take things out of it and then re-release it whenever he wants and however he pleases. Even before DVDs and Blu-rays, you still had Cecil B. DeMille and Alfred Hitchcock making changes to their abandoned works, with entire remakes of their own films being released separately from their original works. Even Stanley Kubrick himself was reported to have decided to take certain scenes out of A Clockwork Orange after its initial theatrical release, and then re-release a changed version to theaters because he was afraid that certain scenes had inspired certain acts of criminal harm in those who've watched it. Again, this doesn't mean we have to like all of these versions of various canon. We can still dislike the newer edits of the original Star Wars movies for simply being more stupid and distracting than the original versions. We can still like the remake of Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments better than his original black and white silent film because the remake stars Charlton Heston and Yul Brynner in a very colorful and over-the-top aesthetic. We can even decide if we like an extended or an unrated edition of the film over its initial theatrical edition. We just have to recognize that these other stages of the canon's abandonment still exist, and the faster we come to terms with their existence, the more useful conversations we can have about them. Each of these various changes made to the ever-developing canon are unique to each storyteller's own sense of being during the time in which he was in that said state of being. The original cut of Blade Runner is unique to a Ridley Scott that lived as a young British man working in America during the late 80s and early 90s, and his final cut of the same film is unique to a Ridley Scott who was an older British man working in America in the mid to late 2000s. So to bring it all back to Star Wars, Timothy Zahn's Star Wars books will always be unique to Timothy Zahn, at the age Timothy Zahn was during the time and place during which Timothy Zahn was that age, and no one can take that away from him. The books he wrote existed at some point in the Star Wars marketing powerhouse, and nothing can take that away from those book sales. And each reader took in Timothy Zahn's Star Wars books in a way unique to their own age, time, place, and order in which they've read the books. But if J.J. Abrams wants to make a Star Wars movie that's unique to him, or if Disney wants to make a new Star Wars trilogy that's unique to them, then they're allowed to do that as well, regardless of whether or not those parties stop to consider Timothy Zahn's own unique take on the mythos in the process, or the reader's own unique way of internalizing these Star Wars books, even if it means watching a series of Star Wars movies that don't recognize that lightsaber crystals are the source of a lightsaber's energy.